Stats, folks, the stats for the 2021 year that was for the 11 Tier 1 teams in international rugby. So we're looking at the Six Nations sides, the Rugby Championship sides, and Japan. And we just want to see how did they kind of compare to each other statistically in that 2021 whole kind of calendar year, be it Six Nations Rugby Championship, November, July games, all that kind of thing. And we'll kind of see what sticks out from each team. I do love a thing about rugby in that there's no one right way to play the game. Sometimes it can be like rock, paper, scissors, and the one tactic which works against one team doesn't work against another. You kick high balls to one team, they struggle, you get heaps of kind of regathered ball, or they drop it and you get scrums. Other teams have got phenomenal players in the air and it doesn't work at all. Some teams you can cut them to bits with clean breaks and turnover ball. Other teams don't cough up anything. So yeah, there's definitely different ways to play the game, and that kind of shows in the stats. We'll go through each team, highlight a couple of good or bad stats. It can be good or bad. Sometimes it's kind of neutral, like offloading. Is lots of offloads good or bad? Neither. It just kind of depends on the way you want to play the game. But we'll go through the stats and you guys can let me know your thoughts on each team. We will start with Italy. Now, to be fair, to find positive stats for Italy is not really an easy thing based on the results from 2021. They make 145 tackles a game, which is the third highest of all the teams we're looking at here. Of all the 11 teams, they are third out of the 11. So that's a lot of tackles for any one team to be making. That's a fair defensive shift for those guys to be kind of put under that pressure. To balance that, they miss a lot of tackles, but the 145 is still there. They make 145 tackles a game, which is, that's something to be said for the commitment of those guys. There's a bird eating sunflower seeds right outside my window. Hold on a second. Right, Italy. Bad stats, there's a lot to choose from. I mean, they make a lot of tackles, but they miss a few. They concede the most tries. They concede the most penalties. They can concede the most clean breaks. The one that was kind of the most frustrating and really rung true from all the games I watched of Italy this year, just gone, was defenders beaten. They're the lowest of all the teams that we're looking at here. So they're 11th of 11. 13.8 defenders beaten per game is 11th. They're below only... Well, they're below everybody, and Argentina's the next closest with 13.9. So, I mean, that rings true for me because watching Italy in 2021, often the attack just seemed blunt, and I think that is a large part of it. They really kind of find it difficult when they have got ball to break opposition defenses open. So, not great. Not great, but... new coach, so we'll see what happens and if these numbers go up for 2022. Japan, we'll move on to Japan. They're an interesting side because they have a really distinct style of play, and it definitely shows in their stats. Like when you think Japan, you think mobile team, likes to play kind of quick ball, and I do think that's reflected in the stats. They have, remember, we're not talking about a heck of a lot of games for Japan because they didn't get a lot of game time, but less possession and territory than most of the teams that we're looking at. They got the fewest kicks from hand from any of the teams. They don't really maul it at all. They maybe average less than a maul a game. So it's not really a tactic of theirs to kick it away a heck of a lot, to maul it up at all. But what they do is pass it a ton. They pass 169 times on average per game. So that's behind only Ireland and ahead of New Zealand. And Japan, as I said, lives on very little possession. Like when I say very little, we're talking in the 40s. But generally the teams that pass the most have more than 50% possession because you got more ball, you got more time to pass it. But Japan just love to spin it. They don't kick it. They love to spin it, and it's kind of clearly represented in the stats. I thought that was pretty cool. Negatively, I mean, they conceded the second most of all the clean breaks of teams in 2022. 7.83 clean breaks conceded is probably a bit too high. The defence probably wasn't there, and that, that's probably not playing any games in 2020 and just being maybe a yard off the pace. That's why these guys need to get into a regular competition, because when they did meet teams like Ireland and whatnot, they conceded just too many clean breaks. Most of the teams were around 4. So the only team that was worse than them for that was Italy. So that's definitely an area I think Jamie Joseph will want to improve for 2022. Scotland are also a pretty fun one, because when you think Gregor Townsend Scotland, you're thinking that guy loves to attack. His Scotland side, he's a real attack coach and he loves to chuck it around. And sure, they do have some really good attacking numbers. They're the second team for possession and territory. They're the second team for carries. They're the second team for defenders beaten. I think they're first if you take away New Zealand's tier 2 opponents. So Scotland do have some really nice attacking stats, but where they shone, seemingly, was some of the defensive numbers. Tackle rate at 90% overall for the whole season gives them the highest tackle rate of any of the 11 teams we're looking at. So 90% is really phenomenally high. France is second with 1% below. Most of the teams are around the kind of mid-80s. So 90% is really exceptional work, and credit to the defensive shifts these guys are putting in. And their clean breaks conceded is also really low as well. I think they're first in that regard. So just defensively, Scotland are a pretty hard side to break down. On the flip side, where could Scotland be doing better? Their turnovers won is the 11th team. They're not prone to pinching that much ball. But remember, they're a team that likes to play possession, at least in 2021, so less opportunity to pinch ball. But the line-out. I know Scotland had some issues with hookers being injured in 2021, and maybe that'll be a bit rectified. Likewise, locks. But 81%, the Scottish line-out is the worst of the 11 teams we're looking at. So that's a clearly, easily, I guess, fixable one for Scotland. Get the hookers and locks fit. Get that kind of set-piece training done, but it's certainly an area to improve, because missing lineouts at key times can certainly cost you possession and can cost you games. So that's Scotland. For Australia, they're really a hard one to classify, because so many of their stats were very middle of the road, but not really the most for tries, not the most tries conceded, clean breaks conceded, and even in Australia's own stats, their stats versus New Zealand are quite bad. And then their stats against the other teams in the Rugby Championship and even France when they hosted them are actually quite good. So, a bit of a mixed bag, the Aussies. But, one area that stood out to me was their possession and territory. They are third overall behind Scotland and Ireland. So they like playing with the pill, and they like playing in the opposition half. So 55% and 57%. But their kicks from hand is low. 21 kicks from hand per game. So they don't kick the ball away a lot. Generally, the teams who have a lot of ball possession, they kick it a lot more. Whereas Australia is kind of down with Japan and Italy in terms of the amount they kick the ball. And New Zealand, to be fair. But Australia has more ball than Japan, than New Zealand, and than Italy. So Australia doesn't kick that much for the amount of ball they hand, which I guess indicates that Dave Rennie likes his guys to be able to carry, but kick when necessary. But not really a kind of a night and day earth-shattering one there. Penalties conceded is an area where I think they have a little bit of trouble as well. Again, they're not the worst side. They are like the 4th worst in terms of their disciplinary record, so 4th highest in terms of number of penalties conceded. But interestingly, the other teams which are high for penalties conceded are also low for possession. So they're used to being on the back foot. When you're under pressure, that's when you concede those penalties, right? Slowing the ball down or, trying to pilfer the ball where it's not on. Whereas Australia is conceding penalties seemingly when they've got more of the ball, which is, I would have thought, a kind of easily rectifiable one for Rennie's guys in 2022, but better decision making. But that's the one I highlighted for the Aussies. France are another really interesting one. They love to play without the ball, the least possession and territory of all the teams we're looking at, but they still manage the 3rd most defenders beaten, they make the most tackles, which makes sense if you haven't got that much ball. They got the second highest tackle rate at 89%. But the most interesting one for me is their offload rate. Now, I'm just taking the number of passes they made and the number of offloads they made and working out what percentage of all those passes were offloads. And for France, it's 8%, which is the highest. Now, they don't offload it as much in terms of pure numbers per game compared to New Zealand, but New Zealand throw more passes. So in terms of the number of passes that they throw being offloads, France is higher than anybody else. So if there's a reason you like watching France play sometimes, maybe you don't, but they chuck the ball around. That's just the French style at the moment under Gaultier. They love chucking the ball around. Most of the sides are around kind of 4 or 5%. New Zealand's up there at 7%. So yeah, when you offload it more than New Zealand, it kind of speaks to, playing a distinctive style of rugby. But where they don't kind of do some of the more traditional stuff we would expect, they don't maul it much. They maul it more than Japan, so they're second in terms of mauling it the least. So 10th of the 11 teams in terms of the pure number of mauls per game. 3 mauls they're set, and they have a similar number of lineouts to the other teams, which is where most of the mauls get set. So yeah, France, maybe that just speaks to the passing and the offloading. They don't maul it that much, and they got a pretty big pack. They got some big locks and whatnot, so you might expect them to maul it a bit more, but yeah, just not a real common tactic for this French side. They still kick it a fair bit, despite the fact that they don't have that much ball. But yeah, not that much on mauling, lots on offloading for France. Argentina, similar to Italy, are kind of a bit of a negative news story, I'm afraid. If you are looking for positive stuff for the Argentinians, they are 3rd overall for the number of turnovers they win per game. And I will give credit to Julian Montoya for that, because that guy is a proper unit, tackles the house down and wins turnovers. So Argentina, pretty solid at winning turnovers. But you got to remember, they're under the pump a lot. So you're more likely to win turnovers when you're having to defend for large periods. It's New Zealand and Ireland that are ahead of them in turnovers. But yeah, at least that's kind of a bit of a positive in a season which wasn't that positive. Kicks from hand, they're also 3rd, so they have been kicking the ball away a bit, but you maybe look at that as not necessarily a particularly positive stat, because where they struggle has been with their carries, and the stats they show this as well. Run meters conceded, they're 1st, which is not the place you want to be. Clean breaks, they're last, which is again not the place you want to be. Goal kicking percentage, they're last, but run meters per carry. So every time you carry, what's the average amount of meters each guy is going to carry? It's 3.06. So also last, 11th spot of the 11 teams we're looking at. You've got some real game breakers in that Argentinian side. You got outside backs like Boffelli, you got Delgui, you got Mojano when he's playing. Did he play this year? Last year? There's loads of guys there that we've seen them for their clubs. They're playing really well, but at international level, they really struggled. So they're behind Italy, who've got pretty similar numbers. But yeah, that's not healthy when you're looking at numbers like that. 4 is kind of seen as anything above 4 or above is seen as pretty good. So to be just around 3 is pretty low. So yeah, again, Argentina's another one that we'd like to see better from them in the coming year. England, a bit like Australia in that they're kind of middle of the road, but not as middle of the road. They're 3rd for tries scored, 3rd for run meters, 2nd for the number of maul sets. So there's certainly some kind of high-end positive stats for the English. But one thing that's good, especially if you like to maul it, as they seem to, line-up percentage is 1st equal, 90%. It's I've seen loads of games, even just the recent weekend of Champions Cup rugby gone, where teams can't get ball in opposition 22, and it just lets off so much pressure. So England to have that stat is a pretty pleasing one, especially, as I said, if they're going to be the team that mauls it up a lot, kind of like South Africa do, then you need to have that ball being very secure, and it seems to have been in 2021. And as I mentioned, the tries and run meter stats are also pretty nice. Meters per carry, they're 2nd, so there's certainly some good kind of go forward stats there for England. Where it's not so good is penalties conceded. 2nd highest of all the teams. England are conceding 13.1 penalties a game, which is, the only team they're better than is Italy. And remember, Italy are under the pump a lot. So, yeah, that seems, again, like a pretty fixable one. Fix the discipline. Some of the penalties, some of them are just dumb. So if you can cut those out, I think that gets your team looking in a better position in 2022. Getting on to New Zealand, my team, they lead the way in heaps of stats, but it's one you got to take a little bit carefully, as you do with all stats, but especially with New Zealand's ones, because New Zealand played a lot of games, and they played a lot of Tier 2 teams. They played Fiji at home, they played Tonga and put 100 points on them, they played the US and put 100 points on them, so New Zealand had a lot of results that were really kind of lopsided and really kind of, buff up the stats. Turnovers won their first, offloads first in terms of pure number of offloads per game. Defenders beaten first, meters per Gary first. But, one I want to look at is clean breaks. They're averaging 13 clean breaks a game, which is phenomenal. That's a huge number, 13. The next teams are kind of 9 and 8.7 in Ireland and England. But if we do the slightly closer look and take away all those Tier 2 games, New Zealand's clean breaks per game does drop to 8.6, which is just below what Ireland and England had, if you remember. But then again, if you take Ireland and England's Tier 2 games out, because remember they both played the US and England played Canada, they played Tonga as well, so then New Zealand still kind of keeps their clean breaks at the top. Ireland and England dropped like in the 6s, so New Zealand, they had a hard end to the year, and clean breaks on that Northern Tour were kind of hard to come by. But they still are able to get guys in space, and clean breaks leading to tries is a pretty common kind of relationship. So yeah, the clean breaks that the All Blacks are still able to generate are good. How they're generating them, is it just Will Jordan with a bit of individual brilliance? Sometimes that's a bit concerning because you'd like it to be a bit more consistent, but yeah, it's still a bit of a positive stat. For the All Blacks, negative stats, one that maybe speaks a little bit to the lacking of physicality sometimes, they lose more ruck ball than anyone else per game. The All Blacks are losing on average 5 rucks a game. That's including all the Tier 2 teams, so yeah, that's similar to Japan, who are doing 4.8, so that's not an area that New Zealand want to be in. And if you're looking at overall ruck completion percentage, New Zealand also had the lowest with 94%, but most of the teams are 95, 96, 97, so not a huge percentage difference, but yeah, New Zealand's certainly coughing up too much ball to break down. Not a good look. Wales are another one, a little bit like Australia and England, where there's not kind of too many outliers. Their line-out percentage is 3rd, which is pretty solid. Their kicks from hand is 4th. Possession in territory is a little bit less than 50%. They tackle the second most amount of times per game, 145.7 tackles a game. But one area I liked, which is a quite pleasing stat for Wales, turnovers conceded. So this is a number where you want to be down the bottom of the table, 10.75, which is the second best stat. So they're only above, which is where you don't want to be. You want to be last for turnovers conceded. They're only above South Africa. So South Africa is the only team that coughs up the pill less than Wales. But if you're looking at the number of passes, South Africa make a lot fewer passes and whatnot. So I think all things considered, Wales has done pretty well to kind of control their game. On the flip side of that, though, their offload rate is the lowest of all the teams. For all the passes they throw, how many of them are their offloads? They're the opposite of France. Theirs is the lowest, 3.1%. South Africa's 3.3%. So 3.1% for Wales. They're not taking that many risky passes, which maybe is one factor in them having the lowest turnovers conceded, second lowest turnovers conceded rate. Their run meters conceded is also a little bit high. Their turnovers won rate is also a little bit low. Remember, Tipuric was out for half the year. So, yeah, Wales, interesting story. It'd be nice to see them kind of up a few more offensive stats in 2022, but yeah, we'll kind of see how they go. Last couple are pretty interesting ones again. South Africa. Now, South Africa's one that they play a very distinctive style. Some people don't like it. I can't understand why. I love the fact that you've got, as I said, different styles. And South Africa certainly play different. Kicks from hand, they're the most. They kick 31 times a game. The next teams are like 26, so there's a big gap between them and the next. They've got the most mauls a game. They love a maul, like 9 mauls a game. I absolutely love it. Like if you're looking at the amount of lineouts they have, just like cross-referencing lineouts against mauls, assuming every maul comes from a lineout, which it doesn't, but it'd be around 70% of the South African lineouts end in mauls, where virtually with Japan, no lineouts end in mauls, right? It's just such a glorious thing to see these differences. But what I did like about South Africa, fewest tries conceded, but fewest run meters conceded. South Africa averaged 259 run meters conceded per game. So this is one where you want to be the last team, and they are the last team for this. The next best was 280. And remembering, South Africa had to play New Zealand twice in Australia, and New Zealand's the team that cracks up the most run meters. Some teams didn't even have to play New Zealand, and South Africa still got, on average, the best stats for run meters conceded. I think that speaks volumes to the defensive shift these guys put in. Where is it a bit kind of on the low side for South Africa? You're looking at the fewest run meters from them. So they concede the fewest, but they also gain the fewest. But remember, they're kicking it a fair bit. Fewest carries, fewest offloads. One area where I think some South African fans might agree, they could pass it a bit more. There's times when you watch that South African team and you're like, I think they've got an overlap here. Or it's like, is that 2-on-3? And they kick it. They don't pass it. Sometimes you're pulling your hair out watching them, because they just first instinct sometimes seems to be to kick it. When they capitalize on it, they can, but sometimes they don't. Fewest passes of any side in 2021 that we're looking at, 90 passes a game. France was the next with like 114, so that's a big gap, and France have a lot less possession than South Africa. So, more passes. Just, I'm not saying change your whole game plan, but just sometimes when you see those numbers out wide, get it out to Mapimpi. Colby will be back. Give those guys some space, please. And the last one, goodness me, I've probably saved the best for last in terms of, like, I know I went through New Zealand and they had a bunch of golden stats as well. Ireland stats are phenomenal in 2021. Tries, they're second behind only New Zealand. Run meters, second behind only New Zealand. Run meters conceded, they're also second behind South Africa. So you kind of expect, like, New Zealand's going to get a heap of run meters, but they'll concede a few run meters. And like South Africa concede few run meters, but they gain few run meters. Ireland's kind of got the best of both. They're the second best for both. How does that work? You're not supposed to be good at both, but they are. Very good. Ruck completion percentage is first. They're at 97%. Possession and territory first, 57.9% possession, 59.3% territory. I got beautiful stats all round, but the one that I really want to highlight is the number of passes these guys get through a game. We talked about Japan with like 169, Ireland 187 passes per game. That is just that absolute quick recycle ball from the Irish. Gibson Park was on fire at the end of the year. The way he's just able to get in, quickly flick that ball out and get there. Next phase. It was relentless stuff from the Irish. I mean, I was trying to find negative stats, but honestly, there's not a lot. The discipline's good. Like the goal kicking's good. There's not much. You could say the run meters per carry rate, which is 8th, so they're only better than Argentina, Italy, and Scotland in terms of the number of run meters they're getting per carry, is on the low side at 3.36. Like, remember, 4 is kind of where you want to be. But I don't think that matters a heck of a lot when you're considering that they don't really mind how many meters they're going forward as long as they're recycling the ball quickly. But, I mean, obviously, if you can get the ball forward a bit more, that'd be nice. But, yeah, pretty nice stats. But, yeah, as always, stats, you kind of got to take them with a bit of a grain of salt sometimes. Look at the larger context. But I thought some of those were interesting. Some of those really kind of connect them with what you've seen on the screen, right? Like, you look at Japan, you think, man, these guys just spin everything. Yes, they do. You look at Ireland and how quickly they recycle the ball. Yes, they're getting through a ton of work. You look at Italy, their attack doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Seemingly, you're correct. Yeah, just a lot of kind of fun stuff. But anyway, I hope that was an interesting watch, guys. As I said, I kind of spent a wee while gathering all those stats, but it made an interesting read for me, hopefully for you as well. If you want to support the channel, please do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, like the videos, consider Patreon, buy me a coffee, all that kind of stuff down in the description. But otherwise, take care of yourselves, guys, and I will talk to you guys again soon. See you later.